So, aloha everyone. I am Patricia Chin. I go by Patty though. I am the High Hopes Initiative Statewide Manager and the High Hopes Board Advisor on Oahu for Epic Ohana. I'm joined today by my colleague Melissa, who I will let her go ahead and give a brief introduction.
Thanks, Patty. Yes, thank you everyone so much for coming. I am Melissa. I am the Pono process lead at Epic Ohana. The Pono process is a grievance process for young people currently in foster care to make sure that their rights are currently upheld and honored. I'm also the president on the East Hawaii High Hopes Youth Leadership Board and have 5 years experience being in foster care and then as well as being an adoptive parent. And so I'm glad that you guys all came. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Melissa. She is a rock star, and I'm very excited to have her part of my team and to work with her. Before we really get into things, we just want to briefly just share a little bit more about EPIC, EPIC Ohana. Some people know this and some people don't. EPIC actually stands for Effective Planning and Innovative Communication. Our job is primarily and our mission is that we work to strengthen Ohana and enhance the welfare of children and youth through a transformative processes that are respectful, collaborative, and solution oriented. We are firmly committed to the empowerment, effective planning, and innovative communication, and we work to honor the power of family connections. I'm not going to go through all the services because there is a lot and each one of them do different things, but all for the mission of EPIC, which is respecting and honoring and enhancing the lives of our family and KQ who live here in Hawaii who are impacted by child welfare system and even Department of Mental Health as well. But you can see here that we offer a wide range of services that serve Hawaii's community. Melissa and I, as we shared in our introduction, primarily work under the High Hopes Initiative, and High Hope stands for Hawaii Helping Our People Envision Success. The initiative works to ensure that young people who've experienced foster care, primarily between the ages of 14 to 26, have the relationships, resources, and opportunities that they need for success. And this is really achieved by working with the public and private partners on the state and local level to improve policies, practices, increase opportunities to thrive, promote youth voice, engagement, well-being, and create community partnerships. Under the High Hopes Initiative, we have the High Hopes Youth Leadership Board that are comprised of current and former foster youth, again, primarily between the ages of 14 to 26. And they provide the youth voice for the initiative, as well as serve as the Youth Advisory Council for the Department of Human Services, Child Welfare Services. And they do this by educating others on the needs of transitioning foster youth, collaborating with community partners, and advocating for improved outcomes. As you could see from our title, we are presenting on how to be Pono and working with youth. And we thought it was important to just ground ourselves in what Pono means. We all know that here in Hawaii, Pono is a deeply rooted cultural value. It means being in alignment, being just, and upholding moral integrity. And when we work with youth, we really firmly believe that it is our kuleana or responsibility to embody these principles. And that includes respecting their cultural backgrounds, traditions, and the collective values of our community. We know that Pono means standing up for what is right, but not just for us and not just for now, but for everyone and for future generations. Here's our session takeaways. We are really hoping that you'll be able to you'll learn how to build respective and effective youth adult partnerships, strategies for engaging young people in decision making and leadership, as well as how to support youth in advocating for themselves. The foundation of being Pono really comes from recognizing the unique challenges that young people face and ensuring that we approach them with respect and integrity and understanding. In addition to these session takeaways, just a quick, just some housekeeping. If you have any questions, we ask that you please hold on to them until the ending of the session so we can address them. If you're like me and you forget easily, because I've been in that space where I had a question and I lost it because I didn't write it down, please put it in the chat. And Stacy, our beautiful moderator today, is going to be monitoring that for us so that way we can address them at the end of this presentation. And as I stated earlier, please take care of yourself how you need to as the time that we are sharing with you. So let's get into the nitty gritty. So to be Pono with youth, we must first understand their brain development. And before we dive into sharing about adolescent brain development and the research that I'm sure many of you are familiar with or have heard in some way, shape, or form, I'd love to hear from you all in the chat or off mute what you think about when you think of adolescence in general and the words that come to mind. So whether that's your own keiki or keiki that you've worked with, when you're thinking about young people, what are the things that you think of? What are the words that come to mind? Impulsivity, full of energy, loving, honest, need to be heard, peer pressure, changes, trusting, exploring who they are and where they fit in. Gullible, yes, that was me. Maturing, fresh perspective, growing in our future, learning independence, need adult help but might not act like it. Yeah, this is great. I love this. And this is like actually a very positive form of talking about adolescence that we have in our mind. So I love that because we're shaping and we're changing our mental models of what has previously existed. So absolutely love that. Keep putting in the chat, keep putting in the chat. And it makes a lot of sense as to why many of us think this way, why we think that young people are impulsive or that they're learning independence or that they need adult help but might not act like it or that they might be a little bit mahaoe or kolohe. And that's because young people are trying to answer the questions of their lives, which was also beautifully put in the chat, which is who am I? Am I normal? And how do I fit in? And I'm sure as I said that, we all had a moment where we could remember the times when we were young people and we were also wondering that same question ourselves. And a lot of this is because the adolescent brain is still growing and still developing, particularly though in the areas that control decision making, impulse control, and our risk assessment. This makes teens more likely to take risks and be influenced by peers or go through that peer pressure. And knowing this helps us avoid judgment and offer support and guidance that we know young people need to navigate their lives. So, adolescent brain and resilience research is actually showing us that our brains are developing a lot longer throughout our lifespan than we previously thought. Our brains actually continue to develop until our mid to late 20s. I'm just going to share this comment because it was shared with me the other day. We were talking about how Melissa, you shared that your brain is almost fully done developing because we're coming up close to age, and I think I have reflected a lot about that as well when I have gotten older, and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is it. Like, what's happening? And that's totally okay and it's appropriate. We love that. And adolescence spans, we know, approximately between the ages of 10 to 26. The window of development is not just categorized by age, but by specific changes happening in the brain. And research shows that humans actually have a unique ability to mold their own brains through thinking, through planning, learning, and acting, known as neuroplasticity, which is especially malleable during adolescence. So this malleability actually means that our brain are changing shape in response to the experiences and interactions that we have when we are adolescents. This has some big major implications for rewiring and healing from past experiences as trauma, as it was once believed that once a young person had experienced trauma that you weren't able to heal, that the experiences and the impact your brain was going through was set in stone. And that's not the case anymore through research. And that's because during adolescence, the brain is actually pruning away the gray matter that exists between different parts of the brain, which clears for more efficient pathways for our synapses to connect and improve communication between our cells and the different parts of the brain. All that to say that also during adolescence, as many as 30,000 synapses may be lost per second over the entire cerebral cortex. And the unused synapses are pruned away and other neurons are being strengthened. And the strengthening of this neural pathway is a process called myelination. And really, what's happening in this moment is that what's being reinforced or acted upon by the young person is being strengthened, and what's not being reinforced or what's not being used is being pruned away. So during this time of myelination happening and neuroplasticity, it's a really prime time for young people to wire their brains in positive ways to use it and improve it rather than not use it and lose it. To leverage this neuroplasticity and opportunity for healing, it is really important to understand how young people process information and make decisions. As we know that because during adolescence, the brain is not fully developed, we're going to see more things like risky behaviors. We're going to see them being influenced by peer pressure. We're going to see them being in that stage where I think we might have all experienced, where we think we know it all, but we really don't, or where we need help, but we're not willing to ask. And that's okay because we have a kuleana and a kulana to helping our young people develop these positive brain development skills and to mature and to use these skills as they grow and thrive into their adulthood. While they are developing, it is important to know that in the adolescent time, they're then slowly relying less on emotion and that impulse to drive their decision making. And they're able to shift to use the skills that they're seeing, that's being modeled to them, that they already know in the prefrontal cortex to really slow down and engage in reflection and think more critically about some of the decisions that they're making. And again, as I stated, it is really important in our kuleana to support and provide young people with opportunities to practice these skills. And when we say skills, we mean skills that is any adult would need to succeed in life, whether that's challenge, whether that's responsibility, whether it is healthy risk taking. And when we say healthy risk taking, that could be such a thing as like having your young people have a cell phone or allowing young people to date or allow young people to get a job. These are all the things that'll promote positive brain development. So, with all that being said, I'd love to hear from you all again about what supports and opportunities can you provide young people to promote positive and healthy brain development? What you're doing now, maybe things that you've heard from a session previously. Yeah, feel free to come off mute, drop them in the chat. And I seen the first one, love them. Yes. I've been in many conversations, especially when talking about foster youth, with people who have not changed their stance about foster kids being troubled. And they have asked me, well, what do you think it is? And I said, 9 times out of 10, we're just looking for someone to love us. Just love us, just accept us, just allow us to be the teenagers we were never meant to be. And it's shocking how much that one sentence can cause such pause in people who haven't shifted their minds yet. Open communication, provide a safe space, have patience and provide healthy opportunities. Being their safe space. Yeah, that's a big one. Allow self-expression, no judgment. Yes. Being a trusted adult. And I love some of these that are, a lot of these actually that are rolling in because the trusted adult one, Melissa's actually going to get a little deeper into like, what does that mean? Because I think we hear that often, right? What does it mean to be a trusted adult and how can we actually show that to young people? Give them attention, give and show love, shared experience, chances for activities with peers. Yes. Yes, I love all of this. And it's so good to hear the ways in which you're supporting our Kiki. Be an ear and create memories. Melissa, I think this is a perfect transition because a few people have mentioned things that roll right into authentic youth engagement. So I'm going to hand it to you to take it away.
Definitely. Thank you. Okay, so now that we now know a little bit about how adolescents' brains are working, what's happening for them, what's coming up for them, what is our kuleana now as adult supporters, right? Being that trusted support to be able to make sure that they have those opportunities to have positive brain development, have those choices to be able to practice healthy risk taking. And so really what this means is continuing to be Pono with young people and really being able to authentically engage with young people to make sure that they're feeling seen, make sure they're feeling heard, making sure they're feeling valued. And this is so important so they know where their community is around them. They can have personal growth and be able to grow not only with themselves, but as a adult in the community. So as we continue to talk about authentic youth engagement, what it really means is to be active and intentional with partnering with our young people to make sure that we are listening to what's at top of mind for them. And this really requires being committed to flexibility with them, being self-aware of what's going on for ourselves. Is there anything in our body that's showing up? Any biases, any preconceived things that we have been thinking about? And it really has an emphasis on shared decision making and really also having strong communication skills, being able to communicate well with young people, to listen to them and help them also reciprocate communication, to be able to build relationships, build pilina, to have a good trusting relationship. This also looks like being guided by knowledge of again, the adolescent brain that Patty talked about, as well as trauma-informed care. I think a lot of people talk about trauma-informed care, but then also being able to practice it when we work with our young people. And then, of course, using a strength-based approach. This looks like having strength, recognizing the strengths of a young person and using strength-based language. When we talk about the young person, when we talk to them, even sometimes, I know a lot of agencies have even thought about how they write about a young person, whether it's in a court report or on a different type of form, making sure that we're aware of how we're talking about the young person with other people. This also looks like having self-awareness of potential power dynamics. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this, but really understanding what your role is and what the young person's role is. I know we're all coming from different agencies, but sometimes certain adults, right, have more power in a young person's life than other adults. And so it's really making sure that we're aware of that and how that might come off for the young person. And of course, having cultural humility. I know this is super important to so many people, but it's really understanding the young person's culture and maybe if there's any differences between culture, and then just lifting up and being able to learn more about the culture of the young person, and just being humble in that. What goes hand in hand with authentic youth engagement is just promoting engagement in general with a young person. And so how do we do this? One, I know a lot of people said, being creating safe space or being the safe space for the young person. So that's awesome. We're on the same level. So really it's one, creating a safe space. Sometimes you might be a new person in the young person's life. So being able to build relationships and focusing on trusting and building relationships with them, and building trust with those who are important to them. Number two, develop role clarity, making sure that they know why you're in their life. I know sometimes we're going to talk about foster care a lot because that's what me and Patty are familiar with, but sometimes a young person in foster care has many different people in their life. They have a social worker, they have a guardian ad litem, they have a therapist, they have a foster parent, they have a teacher, they have a counselor. There's a lot of people going in their lives. And so sometimes it's hard for the young person to keep track. Who is this person? What are they telling me? What is their role in my life? And so really just being clear with the young person, who you are, what you're there for, and how you're there to support them. And number three, preparing the youth to use their voice. This is huge. Being able to prepare the youth to use their voice looks like maybe it's going into a meeting. Maybe it's a meeting about the youth, about the young person, helping them be able to share what's important for them, what's important to them in that moment, what are their values, what are they maybe advocating for, and being able to prep with the young person for that, to be able to do that respectfully, and say what's in a safe way for them and for others around them. This also may look like prepping a young person for a speaking engagement. Being on the High Hopes board, this comes up a lot, being able to train our young people on how to share their stories and share their voice takes a lot of preparation. And then hand in hand with preparation also comes debrief and being able to follow up with the youth, making sure they understand what happened in the meeting, making sure they knew who all the parties were, making sure that they knew, again, all the people who are going to be there in the meeting or in the audience, and making sure that they understand what happened, making sure they are able to move forward. And then again, following up. Sometimes it's good to follow up them right after. And sometimes again, it's good to follow up again maybe a week later to see if anything resonated or they may have questions about things, and being able to be that trusted person that they can go to with those questions. Okay. Next. Oh, I'm also going to share a little bit. I kind of did that a little bit, but I kind of want to just share a personal story too that goes hand in hand with just authentic youth engagement. For me, right, a lot of my experience is being a young person in foster care. And so for me, one of the big ways I was able to use my voice and being able to be engaged with my social worker was in court. Being able to talk with her beforehand about like what was important to me, what did I want the judge to know, what did I want the other parties to know about. And one, it was about knowing where my mom was, knowing where my siblings were. And so my social worker prepped with me, being able to talk about what it is I was going to ask for. So everyone knew in the room what I was going to ask for. And then it was her debriefing with me after, even though it took, sometimes she was rushing out the door to the next hearing. She took 2 minutes out of her day to be like, okay, do you understand what happened? Do we need to talk more about this? I pick you up next week and we can talk about what the next steps are. And so that's really something simple that can be done, and that it made a big difference in my life. Even though for her it was 2 minutes, she was kind of rushing out the door, but it made a huge difference in my life. And so those are different ways that we can also engage with our young person. Um, yeah. Do we want to move to the next one? Hi. Okay. And then this is super similar, but going hand in hand with um youth engagement is shared decision making. And so it's kind of similar, but in a way is it may the relationship may look different. So with shared decision making, a relationship in which both adults and the youth have a voice. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about this and how we can continue to be pono through shared decision making. So one, of course, it's making sure that we honor the voice of both the adults and the youth, making sure that we have respect for one another's contributions and expertise. As a young person, it was super awesome to have an adult in my life who knew that I was the expert in my own life. I knew what was happening. I knew what was happening that weren't things that were not being said in the open or that was public knowledge. And then both contribute to decision making process. So being able to go back and forth about what it is that they needed and what it is that I needed and what was important for me. So we could both foster empowerment and build, and that the adult in my life could help me build leadership skills and help transition me into adulthood. And so really it's about embracing and learning from one another. And so there's this awesome visual that talks about shared decision making, which is my absolute favorite. It is called the Shared Decision Making Pyramid by Wong, Zimmerman, and Parker. I just want to say that so I wasn't stealing it and giving credit to the ones who created it. And this is super awesome because it helps us really visualize what control and shared decision making looks like. Okay, so I'm gonna make this a little bit bigger on my screen because I feel like I'm going blind. Okay, so on the left-hand side, we have adult control, right? This comes with the lack of youth voice, lack of youth participation, and adults have total control. If we move a little bit towards more empowering young people, we're at the symbolic level where youth have a voice, but adults still have most of the control in the relationship. On the flip side of that, there's the youth control, right? That means in the autonomous level where youth have have voice and are active participant role, and youth have total control. As an adult, this is a good thing, right? To be autonomous. But as a young person who still might need guidance, be able to have a trusting person to help with risk-taking behaviors, this is still not where we quite want to be at. And so we move a little bit to the next level where our youth is independent. At the independent level, youth have a voice and are active participant role, and adults give most of the control to the young person. We're working towards empowerment, but we're still not there yet. What we really want to be is somewhere in that middle category of shared control in the pluralistic level where youth have a voice and an active participant role, and youth and adults have shared control. So that shared power, shared decision making, making sure that we're both on the same page to be able to have a good positive relationship. And so this is my favorite thing because it's a good way to really check ourselves to be like, okay, how are we working with a young person? Am I giving the youth all the control? Am I taking all the control? Or are we kind of somewhere in the middle? And sometimes it takes a lot of time to work up to this, depending on if you've been in a relationship with this young person for a while, or this is a new young person that you're starting to work with. So I love this tool.
And Melissa, I just want to jump in real quick and just add, specifically as you mentioned, how like sharing control feels funny, especially because you're like, how can I have control but also give control to the young person? And sometimes it's just transparency. It truly is being able to step into space with a young person and be able to say right off the bat, like, this is what we're here for. This is what I'm holding. What are you bringing? And then also coming to common ground of like, today we're going to achieve this. and through this process, like transparently, this is what you have control over. Like, this is what I'm able to do for you, and vice versa. I've sat in on many meetings where I've watched young people give feedback and then none of their feedback was implemented. So we almost just like checked the box of like, oh my goodness, young people were there. It's great. We checked the box. We can move on. And then I've been in meetings and spaces where people have asked out loud, young people more specifically, why does my voice matter in this room? What's happening with this information I'm giving you? And then our partners start to share, like, actually, we're looking to develop X, Y, and Z out of this. Or, I actually, as much as I want to give you control over this, we're operating within this timeline and this constraint. And that just provides young people to feel like, okay, I have control over certain things in this space. And that's all, like, literally, it just boils down to information and transparency.
Okay, so how do we promote shared decision making? How do we put this into practice, right? Well, number one, it's being receptive to the ideas of the youth that you're working with, making sure we're listening to their ideas and the desires of the youth. Also identifying strengths in the suggestions that they're made, are that the suggestions that are made by the youth, making sure that we are honoring what they're sharing, and then working to implement their ideas, kind of like what Patty was going to saying earlier, like, why are we getting this? What is the purpose of getting this information from the young person? Are we going to implement their ideas? Are we using their ideas for a certain reason? And really just being clear with the young person for that. And then, of course, thinking outside the box and being creative and trying to meet their needs. Sometimes in certain agencies, there's a lot of maybe even red tape, certain things you have to follow, certain criteria. And so sometimes it's about working outside of the box, to making sure that the young person's needs are being met, but also your needs are being met in that way. And then, of course, advocating alongside the youth and making sure that the youth knows how to advocate for themselves. And so this is super, super perfect because we're going to talk about how we can help with this last point around helping young people advocate for themselves. Okay, so encouraging self-advocacy with a young person. And so we have 5 key steps that we kind of use often, around promoting self-advocacy for young people, as well as helping adults know how to support young people in their advocacy journey. Okay, first step, identify and clarify. So during this step, it's important to make sure that as an adult supporter of the young person, about their concerns or issues they may have, and ask how you can support them. Ask them the clarifying questions. Identify and clarify what the problem is. What are they coming to you about, and what do they need support in? Step 2 is making sure that the young person has a person that they can reach out to, a trusted person. Maybe you're that trusted person, and being able to help support them in creating a plan, that honors their opinions, and remind them that they are not alone, in this reach out. And then step 3, is to have courage. And sometimes it takes practice, and it takes preparing the youth and preparation and the debrief and the follow-up. Because courage can be a really scary and risky thing for a young person, especially if they're asking for something that's super important to them, or maybe even in that moment feel life or death, for them. And so it's really making sure that we honor that and make sure we have time to practice with them, prepare them for all outcomes, and really most of all, believe in them. Step 4 is making sure that the young person speaks up, identify the right time and place, and demonstrate and reciprocate that respect. So our kuleana in this step is to making sure that we are finding the right time and the right place, for the young person to express their concerns. Maybe their needs and concerns need to be expressed in a certain type of meeting. So making sure that you address that and help them and support them in that. And then step 5 is to reflect, consider what lessons were learned, and follow through. One of the things that we do when we teach this, we have a self-advocacy training that we would teach young people, is making sure that they know that it's either you're never losing by asking, you're never losing by speaking up for your needs, but you either win or you learn. And that's really what we want to make sure that young people understand. And we help the adults who are supporting them understand, is that making sure that young people feel heard, and that their needs, may have not, what they were asking for may have not happened, but at the end of the day, their voice was being heard, their opinions were being considered, and we just empower them to make informed decisions, and even set boundaries next time, pursue goals, and really just to have confidence into continuing to advocate for themselves. And then, of course, follow through, and debrief with a young person.
And Melissa, if I can just add a
Yeah.
little bit more onto this piece, because I just think it's important that when we're thinking about reflecting, when we're following through and when we're debriefing, when we're doing any of these steps really with young people, but specifically the outcome, yeah, because sometimes we know young people ask and they might not get what they wanted. I think one of the examples in the youth's self-advocacy training that we give is like if you'd ask your resource caregiver for McDonald's for dinner and they said no, they might be really disappointed by that. And maybe McDonald's isn't the in thing, but at the time, that's all we could think about was McDonald's. And maybe they're really disappointed by that. And I think it's important that we as adults like allow them to feel that. Like, yes, we want them to see like, hey, you would actually advocate for yourself and you did it at such a good time and you did X, Y, and Z. You never get what you wanted, and that's totally okay. And let's feel that. I think the feeling part is important. We cannot bypass that even in the moment. If they advocated and they didn't get what they wanted, allow them to feel the disappointment, allow them to feel bad about it. But then let's remind them of like what were the positive outcomes that came from it. I think it's really easy for us to try to think about the positive because we don't want young people to sit in the negative feelings for too long. But we also want them to acknowledge how they're feeling so that way they can feel that, acknowledge it, ground themselves in it for a little bit, and then move forward. So I just wanted to, that was really important, especially I think many of us who have keikis of our own. Like you gotta let the young people feel how they feel. You gotta let them cry. You gotta let them scream. You gotta let them shout. And then we come back together and we process and we figure it out and we go through what did we learn? What did we gain?
Thanks, Hattie. Yeah.
Yeah.
Overall, kind of using all the tools that we learned, really what we really want to make sure is that we understand how to support young people and continue to be Pono when we're working with them. So that means understanding their brain development, understanding what's happening for them in their certain age development, authentically engaging with them, practice shared decision making because that's a big one that I think even I'm still learning to do with my own child. And then promoting self-advocacy, really being able, like we said, being able to partner with a young person to be able to advocate for themselves, and then really just guide them and being able to strategically share for themselves, strategically use their voice in a way that works for them, in a way that is safe for them and everyone who's around them. And so I see one question in the chat, and so we really just want to mahalo you for working with young people, being concerned about young people, loving young people, and having being that safe person for young people. And so we'd love to answer any questions you folks have.
Hi, I asked how can we help them if they refuse to advocate for themselves? So I work at a high school. I have one girl in particular who just has really poor boundaries, especially with her family. And I've watched this pattern where she'll start doing really well in school, she'll start taking care of herself, she'll stop smoking weed, and then say like brother comes over and stays in the house with his baby, and then all of a sudden it's like her world spirals. She can't ask him to not stay in her room when he asks her to smoke weed, she can't say no. And I've like role played with her. I've talked to her about this, and it's just like, it's just so hard for her to set those boundaries. And I'm really struggling with her, and I want to help her.
That's a really good question. And I'm just want to make sure, Melissa, I'm gonna provide some thoughts first, and then if you don't mind stepping in with whatever I might be missing or even your own personal thoughts. This is a tricky one, and I will say, I've had the pleasure of working at ʻOhana as a youth partner, and some of that work specifically really entails supporting the young person and advocating for their needs to their team. And it is a hard one for that exact reason. Like the boundary setting, you don't know where they're at in terms of being able to advocate to certain people, how they're feeling because it feels tough. What we have done in that instance is we've always sat down with the young person at their team meetings, and I realize this is a different type of setting we're talking about, but we've always sat down, we've prepped with them, talk through what it is that they'd like to convey, talk through like what are the points in which you're feeling like I can't do this because this is too much for me, and where can I support you. So sometimes it's like getting that okay to like, hey, can we sit down together and have this conversation, because people need to know what's important. sometimes having that adult person, not sometimes, most of the times actually, because I've also like been through that, having someone there that you trust to help echo and empower you, but also advocate on behalf of you as long as you both have talked about it is really helpful. Because I think especially when it comes to family dynamics, because I'm 29 and I still struggle with this actually today, especially with family. Like that's the kind of relationships that you're like, I'm scared because I don't know how they're gonna respond. And I might need someone next to me. So I like, and actually I had this recently happen. I sat down, I processed it with other family members, and then I was like, you know what, I can do this. I walked in, I had a conversation with my sister about some boundary places, and it went really well. Like sometimes it's also like convincing the young person, it's kind of small kind in their head. We know with brain development, they're thinking of all the worst outcomes that if I tell brother to get out, he's going to reply with all of these negative ways. My relationship with him will be burnt. Sometimes it's that mind shift change. If you convince them that, like, actually, this could also be an outcome, and that's a positive outcome. And with young people that I've worked with in child welfare specifically, I also remind them that sometimes with family, when you are learning your way through adulthood, when these boundaries are put up, sometimes you learn that certain family members you gotta love at a distance, and that's okay because that's protecting you. And that's the really like courageous conversations that it's hard to have because you never want to tell people that, but I think we experience it all in our lifetime, and if we can showcase that it's not a bad thing, that relationships, especially with family, is really fluid, I think that can help. Melissa, I don't know if you want to add anything.
I think that was perfectly beautiful. And I would think the only other thing I would add is like asking her, because this is really with her and her brother, right? Asking her. And it's one thing is it's really hard. Sometimes young people have a better time advocating for themselves to adults than they do with their peers, like and with like Patty said, with family. But I would also ask, like, are there any ways that you already set boundaries with it, with like with your brother? Like, is it like, hey, I'm gonna change, get out of my room, right? So of course she's gonna tell her brother that, and the brother's gonna listen. So what are some ways that she's already set boundaries with the brother that she continued to do that? Another way is like just practicing practicing boundaries and being able to model that for the young person. I think that's always a big one. Like even like what do you say when you set boundaries? What does that look like? Can be super simple as well.
To this, I want to add just a story because my husband had a friend who smoked weed. And I sit there and I struggled with it personally, right? And I told this friend, that's on you, no judgment, but not in the space where I am in. I ask that you not do it in my space, and I ask that you not do it around my kids. I felt like I needed to start with letting him know that's on you. Like go you if that's your priority and your prerogative. I have no judgment towards that, but I would appreciate not in my space. Because sometimes I think about it to that point, Melissa, the peer-to-peer level, like maybe the brother thinks like if I don't do it in this way, like you also got to think about where the brother's coming from. If I don't do it in this way, she gonna judge me. So maybe it's I don't know, judge you, but just not in my space.
That's all super helpful. Thank you so much. And it actually sprung an idea for me. Like one of her cousins is like her bestie, and I'm like, maybe if she's there when she's doing it, just to stand behind her and be like, I got your back. So thank you.
Yeah. No, I appreciate these things are hard. I mean, advocacy, I think at this age, it's so funny as an adult when we reflect on, like, even when Melissa and I were creating this PowerPoint presentation, I was like, oh my goodness, 16-year-old me would never. I would never. And like it's always important to keep us grounded to like what are the things people are doing that is effective or what are the other routes and methods? Because even today, the generation we have is very different from when we were growing up. So I just like I appreciate being able to just like process in the moment with all of these amazing brains in the room. Any other questions people might have? Any other things you guys want to talk about? I mean, it could be anything. I know we shared about brain research, we shared about youth engagement, shared decision making, self-advocacy.
There
We
was a
brief.
there was a question, Patty. Someone wanted to know if the PowerPoint, that triangle, the control triangle, would be available.
We can definitely make the PowerPoint available. Yes. We have someone in chat, they're wanting to recommend a book, The Collapse of Parenting by Leonard Sachs. I'm gonna check that out and I'm curious if you wouldn't mind either coming off mute or putting in the chat like give me a rundown. Like what is the book about? Oh, actually, that's a really good point. How to be a parent, role clarity, boundaries. That's a really good point because even in our work today, like for example, for High Hopes Initiative, I serve as the board advisor for the young people on Oahu. I'm not a parent, but I help make sure that the container is set for them to show up and advocate and educate and do the things that they feel is right for the young people who live on Oahu, as do all the other board advisors for the other islands. And to that point, in some ways, like learning more about parenting, like I also have kids. I also have kids. And I know that there's also like, there is no life rule book on parenting. There are books like this that I'm really excited to check out that can give you some insight. But to that point, even if we're not a parent to these young people, like if we are not the parent or the legal guardian, sometimes even reading stuff like that can also help us in giving us a different mindset change and perspective. So I appreciate that you called that out.
It so it talks about basically that these young people these days rely on each other. So their feedback is coming from their peers, and not from the parent. The peers don't have that experience as parents do. So I love that book. Love that book. So I highly recommend it.
Good. I love that. Do you have any resources to help kids understand neuroplasticity and how the brain works? You know, there's actually a lot of resources out there. There's a curriculum on the adolescent brain research. And I think over the years, like more recently, we're finding that it's also changing. Like one of the big things when adolescent brain research came out was that we found out the brain is still developing way into adulthood, which was big for us because we assumed that the second a young person was an adult, they were an adult, the brain was fully formed, that was it, which in some ways could be good, in some ways could be bad. So that was one of the bigger pieces, as well as understanding that trauma wasn't permanent. We used to think, and I think this is very much in alignment of ACEs. Like we used to think that young people who went through trauma, the whatever their brain had learned, however their brain was wired, there was no way to heal from it. There was no way to have positive habits, skills, brain development, and we learned that that's actually false. There's a lot of research that I can provide to you that you can give with other young people. And unfortunately, I don't think there's anything that like Epic doesn't offer anything uh outside of our High Hopes Youth Leadership Board. So our High Hopes Youth Leadership Boards get trained on adolescent brain research and the science behind it. Epic Ohana as a whole has never done an adolescent brain training for young people, though I could see it being really helpful and effective to also understand like what's happening to you during this time. Um, so I can send to you some resources. Of course, there's the lengthy curriculum. There are videos that can be watched, and then there's like a one-pager summary. But I can send that your way, and you can see like what would work for you or how you'd like to share with your Kiki that you're working with. I'm sorry, I don't have a class to offer. That would be really cool though. Some examples of neuroplasticity that kids might understand that I've heard of are as simple as try to remember when what you need when you're going shopping rather than using a list. Try to remember how to get somewhere without looking at maps and directions. Oh yeah. That's actually really good examples for young people who are that sounds like what I tell my 10-year-old actually now. And I guess she's in that part where her brain is developing and neuroplasticity is happening. So 100%, I appreciate that. And not gonna lie, I still use maps. I make the grocery list. I know some people can though. So that's the funny thing too, yeah, with adolescent brain or any brain research is like some of us know if you make the list, you can follow the list. If you use the directions, you can get there. And then other people, they're like, nah, I just can remember. And some people can. Some people really, really can just remember. I think it also boils down to like, well, what's the process behind that? Like what's your thinking and how's your method? And like those things matter because that was learned somewhere in between your brain development. to do it this way. So maybe it's not a list. Maybe it's not using Google Maps. Maybe when you tell directions, you say you turn left by the coconut tree that's stay next to the third stop sign by this road. But someone told you that, or you've seen that role model, and that's where it'll click. I also have never given directions like that either, but I feel like I've heard people give that example. Anything else? I also don't want to keep you, if there's no other questions, like, hey, see, okay, I'm glad. I'm glad people use that as methods of direction. Anything else people might be sitting with people? Any other questions you might have? Um, Please feel free to reach out. Melissa's and our profiles are made on Sketched. I hope I said that correctly. And we will be in touch. We will make sure that you all get access to the PowerPoint. Kayla, I will personally hand you over some resources around uh, adolescent brain science and the research behind that. But seriously, mahalo for being here and for all the work that you do for our Kiki and our ʻOhana. I don't know you all personally, but it has been a pleasure to be in this space with you. So I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.